If I didn't care more than words can say, if I didn't care, would I feel this way?
I need you, Dex. This is a bad one, the worst yet.
When the technological and applied scientific means are developed, they just tend to be used. I mean, I think one can say that the whole history of recent times in relation to science and technology shows that if you plant the seed of applied science or technology, it proceeds to grow, and it grows according to the laws of its own being. And the laws of its being are not necessarily the same as the laws of our being. I mean, hence this sense which so many people have, and which I think one sees in so many societies, this sense that man is being subjected to his own inventions, that he is now the victim of his own technology and the victim of his own applied science instead of being in control of it.
Aldous Huxley was born in 1894, the third son of Leonard Huxley, the biographer and editor of Cornhill magazine, and the grandson of Thomas Henry Huxley. His mother, who died when Aldous was 14, was the niece of Matthew Arnold. Sir Julian Huxley was his brother. In 1916, Aldous Huxley took a first in English at Balliol College, Oxford, despite a condition of near blindness which had developed while he was at Eton. During 1919, he married Maria Nice, a Belgian, and in the same year he joined the Athenaeum under Middleton Murray, Catherine Mansfield's husband. His first book of verse had been published in 1916, and two more followed. Then, in 1920, Limbo, a collection of short stories, was published. A year later, Chrome Yellow, Huxley's first novel, appeared, and his reputation was firmly established. From the first, the public recognized that the strength of Huxley's writing lay in his combination of dazzling dialogue and surface cynicism, often very funny indeed, with a foundation of great conviction in the emancipating influences he was to exert. For most of the 1920s, Huxley lived in Italy, but in the 30s moved to Sanary near Toulon, where he wrote Brave New World. During this decade, he was deeply concerned with the Peace Pledge Union, but left Europe in 1937 as he believed the Californian climate would help his eyesight, a constant burden. It was in California that he became convinced of the value of mystical experience, and he described the effects of some of his experiments in Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell. Maria Nice Huxley died in 1955, and later Aldous married Laura Acera, a concert violinist who had become a practicing psychotherapist. They continued to live in California, where Aldous Huxley died in 1963.
I think that this is perhaps one of the major problems of our time. How do we make use of this thing? I mean, after all, this was stated in the Gospel. The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. And in the same way, technology was made for man, and not man for technology. But unfortunately, the development of recent social and scientific history has created a world in which man seems to be made for technology rather than the other way round. And we have to start thinking about this problem very seriously and seeing how we can re-establish control over our own invention.
And what makes my head go round and round while my heart stands still?
Would you say then that America or Britain was as liable to suffer from the arts of mass persuasion or brainwashing, say, as dictatorial societies?
Well, at the moment, fortunately, we have in both these countries a considerable constitutional tradition which puts a brake on these kind of activities.
Would my every prayer begin and end with just your name?
In the West, we still remember John Stuart Mill, James Mill, Jefferson, and so on. We still remember vaguely the precepts of Christianity, and we are a little reluctant to embark upon technology, to allow technology to take over. In the long run, we generally succumb.
If I didn't care, honey child, more than words can say. If I didn't care, would I feel this way? Darling, if this isn't love, then why do I thrill so much? And what is it that makes my head go round and round while my heart just stands still so much?
The shortest and broadest road to the nightmare of Brave New World leads, as I have pointed out, through overpopulation and the accelerating increase of human numbers. 2,800 millions today, 5,500 millions by the turn of the century, with most of humanity facing the choice between anarchy and totalitarian control. But the increasing pressure of numbers upon available resources is not the only force propelling us in the direction of totalitarianism. This blind biological enemy of freedom is allied with immensely powerful forces generated by the very advances in technology of which we are most proud. Justifiably proud, it may be added, for these advances are the fruits of genius and persistent hard work, of logic, imagination, and self-denial. In a word, of moral and intellectual virtues for which one can feel nothing but admiration. But the nature of things is such that nobody in this world ever gets anything for nothing. These amazing and admirable advances have to be paid for. Indeed, like last year's washing machine, they are still being paid for, and each installment is higher than the last. Many historians, many sociologists and psychologists have written at length and with deep concern about the price that Western man has had to pay and will go on paying for technological progress. They point out, for example, that democracy can hardly be expected to flourish in societies where political and economic power is being progressively concentrated and centralized. But the progress of technology has led and is still leading to just such concentration and centralization of power. As the machinery of mass production is made more efficient, it tends to become more complex and more expensive, and so less available to the enterpriser of limited means. Moreover, mass production cannot work without mass distribution, but mass distribution raises problems which only the largest producers can satisfactorily solve. In a world of mass production and mass distribution, the little man, with his inadequate stock of working capital, is at a grave disadvantage. In competition with the big man, he loses his money and finally his very existence as an independent producer. The big man has gobbled him up. As the little men disappear, more and more economic power comes to be wielded by fewer and fewer people. Under a dictatorship, the big business, made possible by advancing technology, and the consequent ruin of little business, is controlled by the state. That is to say, by a small group of party leaders and the soldiers, policemen, and civil servants who carry out their orders.
In the short run, we sort of haggle about it, and we are reluctant to, but we tend to be pushed by the advancing technology in a certain direction, which I don't find desirable. And I do think we have to start thinking very intensively about this problem and seeing how we can get control again of our invention. I mean, this is a kind of Frankenstein monster problem.
Is our motto. I was looking for 6 replicants in a city of 106 million people.
You ever see this girl, huh?
Never seen a Muslim.
What I didn't know was they were looking for me.
That it is possible to make people contented with their servitude. I think this can be done. I think it has been done in the past, but I think it could be done even more effectively now, because you can provide them with bread and circuses, and you can provide them with endless amounts of distractions and propaganda. If you were a country gentleman with an income, you were remarkably free, but if you were a peasant on his estate, you were remarkably unfree.
A Blade Runner's job is to hunt down replicants. Manufactured humans you can't tell from the real thing.
What's this?
Roy Batty, probably the leader.
I mean, it's quite obvious that most of us are functioning at about 10% of capacity, and that wouldn't it be nice if we could function at 20%? The word freedom perhaps is too vague a term in this sort of context. I think what we have to ask is what sort of a social pattern and what sort of a political regime is best calculated to help the individuals within the society to realize the maximum extent of their desirable potentiality. I've just finished a kind of utopian fantasy, which is the opposite of Brave New World, which is about a society in which a serious effort is made to help its members to realize their desirable potentialities. And I've gone into, this is an attempt to write what may be called a practical utopia. Nothing is easier, of course, than to enunciate ideals and to say, well, wouldn't it be nice if everybody were good and kind and loving, etc., etc. Of course it would be very nice, but the point is, how do you implement these ideals? How do you fulfill your good social and psychological intentions?
The soul of wit may become the very body of untruth. However elegant and memorable, brevity can never, in the nature of things, do justice to all the facts of a complex situation. On such a theme, one can be brief only by omission and simplification. Omission and simplification help us to understand, but help us in many cases to understand the wrong thing. For our comprehension may be only of the abbreviator's neatly formulated notions, not of the vast ramifying reality from which these notions have been so arbitrarily abstracted. But life is short and information endless. Nobody has time for everything. In practice, we are generally forced to choose between an unduly brief exposition and no exposition at all. Abbreviation is a necessary evil, and the abbreviator's business is to make the best of a job which, though intrinsically bad, is still better than nothing. He must learn to simplify, but not to the point of falsification. He must learn to concentrate upon the essentials of a situation, but without ignoring too many of reality's qualifying side issues. In this way, he may be able to tell not indeed the whole truth, for the whole truth about almost any important subject is incompatible with brevity, but considerably more than the dangerous quarter-truths and half-truths which has always been the current coin of thought. The subject of freedom and its enemies is enormous, and what I have written is certainly too short to do it full justice, but at least I have touched on many aspects of the problem. Each aspect must have been somewhat oversimplified in the exposition, but these successive oversimplifications add up to a picture that, I hope, gives some hint of the vastness and complexity of the original. Omitted from the picture, not as being unimportant, but merely for convenience and because I have discussed them on earlier occasions, are the mechanical and military enemies of freedom, the weapons and gadgets which have so powerfully strengthened the hands of the world's rulers against their subjects, and the ever more ruinously costly preparations for ever more senseless and suicidal wars. The chapters that follow should be read against a background of thoughts about the Hungarian uprising and its repression, about the H-bombs, about the cost of what every nation refers to as defense, about those endless columns of uniformed boys, white, black, brown, yellow, marching obediently towards the common grave.
Would my every prayer begin and end with just your name? And would I be sure that this is love beyond compare? Would all be true if I